Okay, it's just setting up. Oh, where's it gone? What's going on? Oh, there we go. Okay. Right. Good morning, Tony. How are you? That side of the world?
Fine, Kim. How are you?
Can you hear me properly?
I can hear you. Good afternoon from Sydney.
Yes. Hi. It's so lovely to see you again. We've been so lucky to be able to chat with you a few times over the last few weeks and share some of your amazing ideas.
It's my pleasure.
It's lovely and cold here. It's getting nice and cold in Cape Town, which is actually the perfect time to talk about books, to sit in front of the fire and read books and dream of Africa, which your books definitely take us on that travel. So welcome to our next Creative Writing Hideaways Live, where today Tony will be talking to us about how a book is born. So he will speak through from lassoing or harnessing the first idea, and then all the way through right to a published product, which is very exciting for those of you who've been trying out some of his writing tips. And Tony, we'd like to actually talk to you about your book Safari, which you're launching in September. And as far as I'm aware, is also set in Nantwich, in Wangi, which we're very excited to hear about. So I'm just going to go straight into it, Tony. And those of you who are there, please comment, say hi, send some questions that we can perhaps look at the end. And then once we're done, Tony is also going to announce our competition winner from our last creative writing session. So Tony, how do you find your first idea? How do you lasso this first idea?
Yeah, well, ideas can come from anywhere. And just a little slip of the tongue there before, the next book is Last Survivor, but it's set in Nantwich just as Safari is, the earlier book. So
okay.
I will talk a little bit about Safari because it certainly does mention Nantwich, which is very important to me and all of us and everyone at Hideaways. And it's a good example. I've used it, and I do use it when I'm doing courses in writing sometimes because it's got a catchy title, Safari. It's my fourth book. But when I think back on it, it's a good example of how I write, and that goes to how you get an idea. And I guess to recap some of the stuff from our earlier session, Kim, is I know for a fact that one of the things that's happening in lockdown, because I'm getting emails from quite a few people, many more than usual, saying that they're interested in maybe writing that book that they've got inside their minds, or that it's their story or someone else's story. And I know a couple of the people who entered the competition also said feedback saying after the last session that it kind of prompted them to write. And in case I don't mention it later, I just want to say thank you very much to everybody who posted an entry into the competition. We will come to the winner lately, because all of you deserve a great deal of praise. Because one of the hardest things about writing a book that we're talking about today is, certainly there's challenges along the way in writing, but one of the toughest things is putting your work out there. Writing is an intensely personal pastime, but if you want to get published or want to share your words with other people, one of the biggest steps is putting that out there for public consumption. So for everyone who entered the competition and posted their entry online, full marks to you and well done for taking that very important step of sharing your thoughts and ideas. And you all get a big tick just for doing that. So ideas can come from anywhere. And for my readers who've joined us from my Facebook site, we've talked about the background of some of my earlier books. It's fair to say that all of the ideas for all of my books have come from somewhere very different, from a moment in time that's inspired me. And it could be something I've read elsewhere in a newspaper. It could be a conversation I've had with someone around a fireside chat. It could be something I've seen on TV or a discussion I've had. So it's interesting when you look at it. One of the earlier books like Safari and Last Survivor. I'll probably talk about both of them. I know some of my readers are interested in the next book, but I'm trying to hold off talking too much about Last Survivor. But I will today. I'll give you a bit of it. Ideas come from very different places. Both of these have come from conversations. So with Safari, I was in Wangi National Park, staying at Nantwich in its former guise as a small national park satellite camp. And I remember I went into Robbins Camp one day, which is our neighbouring camp, just about 10 kilometres down the road, and got chatting to a guy, a Zimbabwean guy, a bit older than me. He was clearly a tour guide and had a couple of guests with him, and he introduced himself as Leon, and he had a rifle with him, and he was a walking safari guide. So they'd been out in the bush walking, and they were in between trips. I said to him, "Are you Leon Varley?" Because there's a very well-known character up where you come from, Kim. I'm sure you heard of a bit of a local legend by the name of Leon Varley.
Yeah, I know Leon very well, and to collect stories from Leon would be amazing because
exactly. And that's what I was like, oh my gosh, you're famous. And I'd heard so much about Leon Varley. And one of the stories was that while he was out with the walk, not in Wangi, but in one of the more remote national parks up in Chisarira, that he had unfortunately come across some poachers. And I said, is it true that you bumped into some poachers in the bush? And is it true that you shot a poacher? And he said, no. I said, oh, well, that's obviously a myth. He said, no, I shot two.
That's also quite an amazing question for your first meeting.
I know. And as an author, you develop a radar, right? There is the moment you hear something is the moment that you have a book. And Leon told me about these two very hair-raising episodes he had been on. One of them, he actually had guests with him, and it hadn't happened in Wangi, but it happened in this very remote area. And another one, he was by himself, where he had got involved in dangerous situations, and he had been under threat and had shot a poacher, wounded one, in fact. And Leon was most perturbed by this because he only wounded the one poacher and had to carry him out of the bush to seek medical aid. So after shooting this guy that was pointing a gun at him, he had to hoist him up on his back in a fireman's lift and a piggyback and carry this guy to safety and get him medical treatment. So he's a very good guy there. And I thought, isn't that interesting? I thought, what if you had a situation like that? Now, hopefully that's never going to happen to me or anyone else I know on safari. But it got me thinking, and the area around Wangi National Park there's a hunting area outside the park, and I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if you were a hunter and you found yourself in a situation where you came across poachers? What would you do? Funnily enough, many years later, I met a bloke by the name of Clay Wilson, a veterinarian who was working across the border in Chobe in Botswana, a larger-than-life character in every sense. Sadly, no longer with us. He passed away a few years ago. But he and I wrote a book together. We wrote his non-fiction story, Bush Vet, which actually begins with him coming across armed poachers in Chobe National Park and shooting one of them. So true life is stranger than fiction. And more often than not has a basis for a story. So I've got an idea, and I thought, it's kind of what happens if you're out in the bush and something crazy like that happens. And that's enough for me to get started in writing. And just to briefly mention Last Survivor, there's a little bit of information on my tonyparker.net website. Also, part of it said at Nantwich, because I happened to be in Nantwich when I was writing the new book, Last Survivor. And as I've said in some of my previous talks, is I very much draw my inspiration once I start writing from wherever I happen to be. So if I'm in Nantwich, it's a good chance Nantwich will end up in the book. If I'm in the Kruger Park will be in the book. So Last Survivor, the idea came from some time I was spending with a friend in Harare, with a very good friend of mine, and she had moved into town after being moved off her farm, unfortunately. But she had a collection of plants with her, cycads, plants, I should say. Cycads are these weird Jurassic era spiky plants with big colourful cones. They're actually related to conifers rather than, say, succulents or cacti, even though they look similar to all these plants, or aloes and things. And I said to her, why, with all of the upheaval that was going on in your life, why did you move all of these plants off your farm into town? She said, because they're worth a fortune. And I didn't realize that there is this very profitable, big, high stakes trade in cycads. And they're incredibly collectible plants, and there are wealthy cycad collectors around the world who will pay an awful lot of money, sometimes up to $100,000 per plant for some of these plants. And in parallel with that is an illegal trade. And my friend started telling me all about the illegal trade, not that she was part of it. She started telling me some very hair-raising stories about undercover operations that had been mounted by US authorities in Africa and international cycad smuggling rings being brought down. So in both of those cases, a guide or a hunter in the bush encountering poachers, and then this new book, Valuable Plants, an illegal trade in valuable plants. For me as a writer, that's all I need. And it comes to you like a light bulb moment. And you know, as soon as you have that idea, you're ready to go. And that's my start.
I remember you saying that last time, how you collect your stories is from conversations. And those are two very interesting conversations. And I think Africa is such an amazing place. Like you said, truth can be stranger than fiction sometimes. And Africa is a place for that, because sometimes you're just like, what is happening? You know, it's quite an unbelievable melting pot of stories and things that happen.
Well, it certainly is, Kim. You know, like here in Australia, when I talk to my friends, I say, what did you do today or last week? And they said, oh, I worked. I worked from home today, or whatever. If I have this discussion with someone in Africa, it's, let me tell you about the time I was working as a mercenary. Let me tell you about the time I shot a poacher or something.
Yeah, no, it's the unpredictable, and that is the best basis for a story. But now the second question is, you've got the idea, you've had the conversation, you've got the idea. What do you do with it then? Do you plot it out? Do you plot the book out, or what do you do? There's
two ways you can go if you're interested in writing. And my Bible that I've mentioned before, Stephen King, the US horror and thriller writer, his book On Writing is my Bible, which covers both of these, my textbook, I should say, I don't want to offend anyone, but it covers the two very distinct approaches to writing a book. You can do what probably most writers do, is that once you've got your idea, you map out the book from the beginning to the end, the beginning and the middle and the end. And it's what's known as a plot. You construct a plot or a story outline that gives you a blueprint for how to write a book. And you then work out who the characters are, a little bit about them, a little sort of dossier, a little personnel file on each of the characters. And then you break that down into the next level of detail, and you work out what's going to happen in each chapter, in the beginning and the middle and the end. I tried that when I tried writing my very first book that never got published, and I failed miserably at it. So then what I discovered by trial and error, which is in Stephen King's book, there's another way. You can just make it up as you go along. Now, and the remainder of authors write that way.
So the great thing there is for everybody else to be encouraged by your failure, that now you're an international best-selling author many years later, even though you failed the first time. So there's also a tip going, don't
stick with it. Yeah, and I think it's we spoke recently in a webinar about Ghosts of the Past and my last book. That book, although I only wrote it, came out last year. Part of that book contains a large amount of words that I wrote back in 2002 when I was in Afghanistan with the army in my spare time, in the weekends in the middle of the night. So don't throw away anything that you write, you know.
Yeah.
And if you feel like you're not gaining traction with something you started on, stick with it. But then if you don't want to stick with it, start something else. And even if you do finish writing a manuscript, I'm jumping ahead a bit, start something else straight away. And the reason I say that is twofold. It's particularly if you're writing fiction. It's different if you're writing your memoirs or your mum's story or dad's story. That's a one-off book. But if you want to write fiction and novels, there's a good reason for starting something else straight away. A couple of good reasons. You'll get better, hopefully, as you go along. I certainly hope I've improved from that first failed book that I wrote. Number two, if you are looking for a publishing deal, publishers don't really want fiction authors that can only write one book. If you were to get a deal with a publisher, we can talk about that later, they want to know that you've got something else underway. And the third reason is that you should only write if you genuinely enjoy it. If it's a chore, if you're finding it too hard and it's frustrating, you maybe do something else. But if you find that once you get into the groove, you really enjoy it, and experiment. Now, the thing with the two different approaches, I get in trouble a lot, Kim. I speak at schools, not too often, but when I speak at schools, I talk to kids who are maybe interested in creative writing, and they say, how do you write? Do you have a plot or do you make it up? Because kids are clever. Kids are clever, and they know what they want me to say. So I say, you don't need a plot. You don't need to plan. Just make it up as you go along. And I can see the English teacher in the corner pulling his or her hair out, going, don't say, and shaking her head, because kids are taught generally at school when learning the business of writing and creative writing is to have some structure, to plan out what you want before you start writing. And I'm certainly saying don't do that, because that could work for you. And indeed, if I look at my friends who are authors, probably the majority of them write that way. But importantly, what I found is by experimenting, I found a way of writing that I really enjoyed. So Stephen King, in his book on writing, has a good way of describing the way that I like to write. And he says he has plotted some of his books, but he hasn't for others. Some people call it the seat of the pants. Stephen King has a more attractive way of describing this process. And I think it's quite clever, because to him, the idea, that initial idea, the guide who comes across some poachers in the bush, or the lady who is sitting on a fortune worth of endangered plants and is maybe thinking, why don't I sell one on the black market? Because I can make a lot of money. That's the tip. That's not just the beginning. Stephen King describes it almost like if you imagine you're on an archaeological dig and you're uncovering a dinosaur. What your idea is maybe the tip of the finger or the tip of the nose of the dinosaur, and that as you brush away the dirt, and sometimes you use a shovel if it's all happening quickly, and sometimes you're using a little paintbrush or a toothbrush, but bit by bit you're uncovering something big underneath. And so what you're doing, you can look at it as though you're making it up, or you can look at it a slightly different way, that maybe it's there already. Maybe elements of this story or some of it will come to you the more you brush and the more you dig. And I think that's a really clever analogy, because if I think about how I write, sure, I'm sometimes thinking, I think I know what's under here, but then sometimes I don't know what's under there. Sometimes I just have to keep brushing, or I just have to keep tapping away and making it up. And I find writing characters as well as making up, so I make up the story as I go along, day by day. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't want to know what's going to happen next, because the books I write are thrillers. You're not supposed to know what happens next. So I figure if I can fool myself, or hopefully fool my wife who's in the next room, she's the first person to read the book. If she doesn't know what's going to happen next, then hopefully the reader won't know what's next. And as I said, when it comes to characters, for me, writing a character is like meeting someone. You go out and you meet someone new. Hopefully when we're not socially distancing, we'll go out again and we'll meet some new people, maybe friends of friends. And you meet this person and you strike up a conversation with them and you think, hey, we're getting on really well. I really like you, But then you meet them a couple more times and you think, maybe I don't like you that much. So, but we don't know a person until we get to know them. And I find when writing a character is that for me, it's a complete blank sheet. When I start writing a character, I sometimes will know who the hero or the heroine is, maybe, but I certainly don't know who the villain is when I start writing. I have a cast of people, and it's up to me eventually to work out who is who in the zoo. So that's how I get into the business of writing. And so you've either got the plot structure or the make it up as you go along, or as Stephen King describes it, discover as you go.
I like that. I really like that analogy. And I was actually going to ask you, so I've got two questions from that, is do you ever find that what you started with is actually the middle of the book Do you ever sort of start in the middle, and then that's what, like uncovering and maybe uncovering your way to the beginning, or does it always kind of grow?
Yeah, so the beginning of a book is crucial, right? The first line, the first paragraph, the first chapter is what has to hook people. And sometimes I don't know what that is, because, or sometimes I'll change it, because once I get a way into the story, into the middle, so I might have found that where I started, what I thought at the beginning was not in fact the beginning. Maybe there's something that came before that. Ghost of the Past starts with, the beginning of Ghosts of the Past is kind of a prologue, supposedly written by someone separate from the rest of the action. It's a diary entry from 1915. But I thought of that later on, much later on in the book. So I thought that would be a better way to start that story. So the story didn't change as I wrote it, but definitely as you go on, you can think of improving it as you go along. Now, I'll qualify that by saying one thing I don't do is I don't do that sort of stuff until the end. So once I start writing, and I think this is an important tip, if I'm going to give, if people are interested in the business of writing, and some of those great people who entered the competition, if you want to keep writing and you're looking how to get through the next day and keep writing and keep yourself interested, is once you start writing, I'm a firm believer in that you don't stop. You don't review what you wrote yesterday or 2 days ago and try and fix it up. You just keep going until you get to the end. And indeed, Stephen King says that's a good idea, because I know from my own personal experience is that if I start to look backwards, if I start to review what I've written, I get very despondent. I get very down. I think, oh, this is rubbish, and this is all wrong, and I shouldn't be doing this. What I've found is I've had to teach myself to trust my instincts and to keep writing, because you can always fix stuff up later. But sometimes, to get back to your question, no, I don't know what the start of the story is until later on. So I don't need to agonize about it now, or I might think of a better start later on.
Okay, so then the next question is, and it was from I think a fan of yours, what strategies do you use to prevent from diverging too much from the original ideas, or you just go with it?
Oh, this is from Sandy. Yeah, Sandy's. Hi, Sandy. Hopefully you're listening. And thanks for your entry into the competition too, Sandy. Sandy's comes up with lots of questions, which I can't tell you how much I appreciate it, Sandy. I'm very serious about that. But that was a really good question, yeah. So I have an idea. I don't really know what's going to happen. So in that respect, diverging is not too much of a problem. But what does happen is that at some point, the story takes on a life of its own. I'll give you an example of that. Is when I started writing Last Survivor, the book that comes out in September, I thought I would write a book about pangolins. You know about the trade in pangolins. Okay, pangolin is the most trafficked animal in the world. 20,000 of them are trafficked every year, and are believed to have been linked to the start of this terrible coronavirus that we're all involved in now. So I thought I should write a book about pangolins. I wish I did. I wish I did. But what happened was the story became more about plants and less about pangolins. It was going to be about both, because I thought maybe plants aren't going to be, maybe cycads aren't going to carry it. Maybe they're not going to be interesting enough. But what I found when I was writing Last Survivor is the cycads overgrew the whole story. The pangolin was pushed out. The pangolin got edited out. So it does happen, Sandy. And you know what? I think, do I have strategies to avoid it? No. I have to remind myself that it's okay. If the story, I think after 17 books now, I've learned to trust the process. That if the story wants to take me this way, I shouldn't fight it. I shouldn't fight it. I should keep going. So in the book that I'm writing now for 2021, the pangolins are back. Hopefully the pangolins are there. It might be too late, but the pangolins.
So your
are
idea
yeah, it's a really good question. Yeah.
Yeah. So the writing and the story organically grows. You're allowed to organically
and takes hold.
Yeah.
And become. And you know, Kim, I would say to people, let it go, because even if I was, and to be fair, some of the other authors I know who do plot their story out before they start writing, So you know what, it ends up more like a guideline than a roadmap. You know, like it gets them going in the right direction. And if that works for you, you should totally write that way. But I would say to people, if maybe you're like I was when I wrote the first book, I found it incredibly difficult to write. First of all, I found it very difficult to write a plot, which I did. And then I found it really difficult to stick to it. And I found the whole process was painful. And so it wasn't until I then wrote another book, which was published as Far Horizon, this one that became the first book, that, you know, I thought I just took a completely different approach. I just made it up as I went along. And that's the way I still write today. So if you're having trouble writing, or if you find yourself suffering from writer's block, which is something people often say, maybe it's not. Maybe you just need to change the way you work, you know, take a totally different approach. If you've been working to a plot, throw it out. Or if you haven't been working to a plot, maybe sit down and think about what's going to come in the next couple of chapters. Maybe that'll give you the impetus to keep going.
And I think as a creative, you have to explore different channels, because it's not that stagnant, you know, and maybe as you grow over time as well, it may change to suit the different story or the different, you know,
genres and things. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So we've got ideas, and now we've spoken about plot and strategy. Now we actually want to get published. How? What do we do?
Yeah, this is a $64,000 question, and my gut instincts are that it's not going to get easier these days. Rather than it's not going to get easier, it's going to be harder than ever. There's two ways to go if you're going to get published, and as an industry, it has changed a bit over the years, not necessarily for the better. I think probably what's happened these days is if you look at the two options are being published by a traditional publisher. So my publisher is Pan Macmillan, which is an international company with offices. I'm published in Australia and South Africa through Pan Macmillan, have been published in the UK with them and by their affiliate in the United States, St Martin's. And with the deal with the traditional publisher is it's a commercial arrangement. So I write a manuscript and we go through the editing process and send that in to the publisher. They'll go through it and they'll decide, yes, we want to publish this book or not. Now, there's a couple of problems right there from the start. No one knows what's next. Not even if the publishers, we ask publishers if they're 100% honest, they will not know what they are looking for next. They don't know whether they're going to be looking for a vampire book or an Africa book or a 50 Shades of Grey or a Jack Reacher or whatever. They don't know until they see it. It's almost like getting an idea for a story. So there's no point in thinking, I will write a book set in Africa because if Tony Park got published, anyone can get published. Okay, it doesn't work that way. You know, there's no point thinking, oh well, Stephen King makes millions, so I'll write a horror book. It doesn't work that way. You write what you want to write. Now, if you're lucky, because there is a huge amount of luck in there, a traditional publisher will pick it up, and then what happens is it's a commercial arrangement. They then take on all the burden of editing that book in consultation with you, the author, of preparing it for publication, for print, ebook, audio book, and then they produce it and they market it and they sell it. And you as the author get what they call a royalty, okay, which is a percentage of the cost of the book. And for the author, it's about 10% of the cover price of this book. So whatever you've paid for that book, before tax is what I get, 10%. So that's the idea with being commercially published, is that your publisher, a reputable publisher, and it doesn't cost me anything to do that. Okay, I get paid up front and then I make money every time books are sold. They have access to big markets, to the major bookstores that you'd all be familiar with, the online booksellers and the ebooks and audio books. Now, the problem with that is that there are an awful lot of people out there writing books who want to get published, and very few books comparatively off that total that is submitted to publishers get printed. It's a numbers game, and the publisher has to think that they'll be able to sell enough copies to make their money back. And that means not everybody gets through. A lot of people will tell you the odds are against you, and I wouldn't like to calculate them. They're probably astronomical, but that doesn't mean that people shouldn't try.
I think that's sorry to interrupt. I think that's the same in any art. You know, there's so much competition, and there's a lot of people, you know, wanting to express their ideas and their stories and their, you know, but like you said, you got to keep going.
And I guess you've got contacts in the art world, and I would guess that artists are the same as writers, Kim, in that you don't start off doing it for the money. I mean, sure, you might think it would be nice to make some money, but I'm not a sporting person. I like to run, but the best analogy I can make is I write at the end of the day because I enjoy it. Yeah. It's like exercise for me, or it's like enjoyment, you know.
I think if you don't enjoy it, there's no way that you're going to produce something that you can't hook people into something that you haven't enjoyed creating.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. And that's why I say it's also a mistake to think I will write a book because I think that's what the publisher is going to be after. Stephen King says, be honest. Whatever you write, be honest about it. So don't try and think I'm going to write this. Now, the other way to get published is to self-publish, where you go into an arrangement with a distributor or a publisher and you pay to be published. Now, the interesting thing with that is it's never been easier to do that, particularly in the ebook format. But also with print books, technology has also come along leaps and bounds just in the last few years, where in the past, if you self-published a book, you might find a printer, you might find someone to design a nice cover for you, you'll get your book printed either in your home country or perhaps send it overseas, and then you'll end up with 1,000 copies of your own book that you've paid for, and then you've got to go take them to the local bookstore and see if they'll sell them or see if Amazon will sell them. It was incredibly difficult, and the distribution and the marketing were the most difficult things with self-publishing. These days, it is comparatively easier and cheaper to put an ebook up on Amazon yourself or to get somebody to help you with it, and also do what they call print on demand. So I do a bit of this. In the US and UK, my last book, Ghosts of the Past, is a print on demand book. So you don't buy it in a bookstore, you buy it on Amazon or Indigo if you're in Canada, or Kobo or iBooks. And then if you order a print book, it is one copy of that book is printed and posted to you within a few days. So the technology has really come along leaps and bounds. It's possible to deliver a very professional finished product for not very much money without those upfront costs. Now, the most important thing I would say, and the one piece of advice I would give to people, is if you can't find a commercial publisher to publish your book and you decide to self-publish, please do yourself a favor and at least engage a professional editor to work with you on your book before you publish it. Because I have seen many self-published books over the years that they've got a great idea. The person has probably spent quite a bit of money on the cover and the printing, and they look really professional. And as soon as you open that book, you know that what they haven't spent any money on is an editor. So there are certain steps you can miss out on, but there are certain steps that are very vital, and the editing process is absolutely crucial.
And the competition is too high for you to skip that step. Tony, I've got one more question until we announce and hear the passage from our winner. If you go with a publisher, how much do you get as a say in your book cover? And if you talk about audiobooks, how much do you get to say yes or no to somebody else's voice that reads your story? So, or do you kind of hand over those rights to your publisher when you take them on?
It's a good question. There's a bit of give and take, and publishers will always seek my input for the covers. So I am involved. So they come up with the concept themselves, which they think is going to be the best for the book and how to sell it. And then they'll show it to me and get my input. But I guess I'm one of several people that has input. There's the sales and marketing people have their view on it. The publisher, him or herself, has their input, their view on it. I have an input on it. And between us, we try and reach a consensus. I mean, my publishers and I have been working together for 18 years now, 17, 18 years now. We know each other. I also know that it's not one of my fortes. Even titles. I think out of 17 books, Kim, I have picked the title. I've come up with the title for maybe 2 of those books, I think, because when I give up now. It's hard. It's hard. They're very hard. I mean, the book that I'm working on now is called Book 19, So, and until
Oh,
until
catchy.
Last Survivor was known as Last Survivor, it was known as Book 18, because I've
Okay.
given up. I know it's not a strong point of mine, and my publisher takes a great deal of pleasure in reminding me of that every time I try and think of a title. She says, "You're no good at this. You shouldn't."
Well, that's good to have a very honest creative team supporting you there, Tony.
Yeah, and I think also it shows to me that when as I said before about the importance of engaging a professional editor, you have to realise, because I have never ever in my entire life met a writer who knows it all and who gets it right every time, and who is above editing or picks the right title or everything for their book. And if you were to meet this person, they would be completely insufferable anyway. So I've never met anyone like that. So again, kudos to the people who sent their entries in. And if you are more remotely interested in publishing a book, either yourself or through a commercial publisher, be prepared and be ready to accept constructive criticism, because that's what it is. Nobody is going to tell you to change a word or a line or take something out here because they don't like you. They're telling it because they think it's going to be better. Now, the only people who can do that for you, I'm lucky. I've got my mum, my mother-in-law, and my wife, who are all particularly talented and well practiced after 17 books of picking up stuff. But I still rely on my publishers and my professional editors to tell me their views on whether something needs to go or something needs to be edited. So you need to develop a bit of a thick skin, but you have to remember that constructive criticism, if done properly and professionally, is exactly that. It's constructive. It's not.
Okay. So let us hear your professional view on our competition winner. And it would be so lovely if you could read it out for us, Tony, and then tell us how this person came to be the winner.
I will. And it was very difficult. Thank you and I know people expect you to say that, but it was very difficult to pick a winner, because if I could, I would give a prize to everyone who entered. If I could, I would give a prize to everyone who entered purely for having the courage and the honesty to enter. So they have been honest about their emotions. They have opened themselves up to the wider world. Perhaps next time we'll ask for entries in private, but I'm kind of pleased you didn't, because these people who have entered this competition have told me they're interested and serious as well too, and they've been honest, and they've had the gumption to go out there and share their thoughts with the rest of the world. And good on you. Congratulations to every single one of you. I'm going to read the what I consider to be the winning entry, and it's a wholly subjective thing, and then I'll tell you why I picked this one. So I'm just going to find it on my screen, Kim. Okay. Here is the entry, and it starts off in inverted commas with some direct speech. "Welcome to the lodge, Miss Caroline. Please follow me to the veranda while I bring you a cool drink," said Alfred, dressed in his immaculate khaki uniform. I sat down, placing my large sun hat over the arm of the wicker armchair, looking at a scene that I could never have imagined possible. Coming from the concrete jungle of the bustling city of New York, I found it difficult to comprehend that such a vast expanse of savanna even existed. Above the sound of the ceiling fan, which gave some relief to the oppressive heat, I heard different bird song. In the distance, I saw a herd of zebra following their leader in search of water. The sun was beating down on the dry earth, and the few wispy clouds were scattered in the sky, but no real promise of rain. I felt the trickle of tears running down my cheeks. The sheer beauty of Africa had touched my soul. "Your drink, Miss Caroline?" said Alfred, bringing me back to the now.
Oh, I love that. That's very evocative. You can feel the moment.
The winner is Anne van der Westhuizen. So thank you very much, Anne, for that. Now, everybody did a really good job, but I'm just going to tell you a couple of technical things about why I like Anne's entry, because if you cast your mind back to that last talk that we did, I talked about three things that I believe are crucial elements in creative writing, or even nonfiction, that help produce our story. We're talking about giving birth to a book today. So the parts of the book that we need are narrative. So we need someone telling a bit of a story, and Anne has that in there. Description, of course, is also very important. Everybody's description in every entry was fantastic. And as we covered in the last session, description should be visceral. You know, it should tap into as many of the senses as we can. Not all, doesn't have to be all, but we need to see. So we see the khaki uniform. We need to hear the buzz of the ceiling fan, I think Anne had in there. You know, we need to be able to smell, we need to be able to taste, and touch. All these tactile, all engage as many of the senses as we can. And so we don't need to engage all the senses, because that might be too much description. And the other thing that we talked about in description last year is a few well-chosen details will stand for the rest. So Anne's mentioned here the bird song, and she's picked up the cue from the photo that we used in the competition with the herd of zebra and following their leader. So we've got a nice visual there, in search of water, and the sun beating down. And even at the end, I felt the trickle of tears. I love that line, because it's bringing us very much back to Miss Caroline, the character, and we can feel those tears rolling down her cheeks. And I'm getting a little bit emotional reading that one. And well done to you.
That's amazing.
Everybody had elements of those. And of course, the third thing is dialogue. Dialogue illustrates the story. It's Alfred talking in there. It can sometimes tell us about the characters. So dialogue is very important in a novel or in a creative nonfiction book as well. So Anne's entry wins because I think technically she did very well in including those three elements: narrative, description, and dialogue. You got a lovely turn of phrase, Anne. As I said, everybody had fantastic descriptions and narrative. Several people had a bit of dialogue, and to me had the right balance of all three. So, I would encourage everyone who entered to keep writing them.
So hearing you read that one out, because I hadn't read it or heard it yet, which was really lovely. It was a lovely surprise for me. You can very much feel, you know, with the heat, the oppressive heat with the fan, I can feel the movement of that hot air as she sits on that veranda looking out. But like you say, that dialogue at the end also brings you back to her personal story, and you're kind of like, you already wonder, why is she there? Why like, you know,
why is she crying? Exactly.
Why is she crying? And now you want to continue reading. So that's definitely a successful.
And I think, you know, that photo that, because we told people to pick one or more of the photos and use them as the basis of their story. That is the view from the stoop, from the veranda at Nantwich. And I think she has put me back in that place, which is exactly where I want to be right now during our lockdown. I can't wait to get back. And I think that's something we aspire to as authors, to be able to transport our readers to somewhere where we are or where we have been, and to put them in the picture. And we do that through narrative, description, and dialogue.
Yeah.
So
and that's how we travel at the moment.
That's how we travel. And I think, as I said, full marks to everybody for some great descriptive passages in there, and putting us in the heads of different characters. So I really enjoyed that, and I really enjoyed.
We loved that as well. And thank you, Tony, for reading through the different little stories sent in, and for taking the time to critique and give tips, and hopefully launching some people on the path to being authors, and definitely launching us all into wanting to go back to Africa as soon as possible.
One thing I will mention here, Kim, if you don't mind, I didn't mention it to you earlier, but it is something I've been talking about. I think I'm not sure if I flagged it on my Facebook Live from my page a week or two ago, but I have been talking to another author from Australia, a lady I know, and a publisher and a travel agent here in Australia, about putting together a writer's course, which will be we'll base ourselves at Nantwich, and maybe have, say, 5 days of game driving safaris, but also a little bit of creative writing presentations and some workshops and things. So who knows when this will be, whether it would be next year or the year after, but we're certainly putting the wheels in motion to do that with Hideaways. And
what a lovely thing to look forward to, because to immerse yourself.
So if we have any aspiring writers out there, and hopefully we do have a few tuning in who thinks that might be for them as opposed to the normal safari holiday, maybe drop me a line via my Facebook or via my website, and just let me know if you're at all interested, because it would also depend on how many people we get.
I'm in. I'll book a seat to be in Africa and write. I mean, it's amazing. Tony, we have to end off there, but Anne, we'll get hold of you and let you know about your holiday. So congratulations and well done. And Tony, we hope to speak again soon and get some more insight.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, everybody.
It's been lovely to chat. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a beautiful evening and a beautiful day.